Greetings, everyone. I am Belinda Parker Brown with Louisiana United International. We are a civil constitutional human rights organization based in the state of Louisiana. And I'm so excited to be here with you all and discuss one of our members, none other than Reverend Errol Victor. We're going to talk about how LUI, Louisiana United International, came to know him. On August of 2012, I received a phone call from a young man by the name of Emmanuel Victor, which is one of Reverend Victor's sons. He had previously heard a community discussion online about Louisiana United International and how we take it seriously and personal when people are being done wrong in the criminal justice system. So let me tell you a little bit about what that community discussion was about. The topic of the discussion was, what if you or your brother or your mother had been given 25 years for smoking a marijuana joint? What if your son received life for a crime he did not commit? What if you paid a lawyer $30,000 and was forced to take a plea? We begin to talk about the traps and the schemes and the plots that was happening in our criminal justice system. And as we begin to go into the courtrooms and court watch and see where a person can have a trial with 12 jurors and be found guilty by 10 and given life in prison, we nicknamed it the 10-2. So I received this call from Emmanuel Victor, Reverend Errol Victor's son. And he began to tell me the story about his dad. And it caught my attention because when he told me that his dad was fighting for his life for a crime he did not commit, and told me that his dad was accused of murdering his stepson. Now, I want the people to understand, whenever it comes to a child and an elderly person, I really have to think about whether or not I want to deal with a case like that, because I'm very sensitive to children and elderly people. But I took the time to hear Emmanuel out and tell me his dad's story. And he said, Miss Parker Brown, you know, my dad wasn't even home when this alleged crime supposedly had taken place. My dad wasn't even home. So as he began to explain to me that his dad was a prominent businessman in the community, that his dad was working on a major development that was going to bring about economic development that would bring about businesses for minority people in a dilapidated community. And, you know, his dad had teamed up with 18 of the Saints players to build them $1 million homes in a corridor right outside New Orleans, Louisiana. And that they had already, you know, signed, you know, contracts to bring about a strip mall that would bring one of the anchor leading grocery stores, a Piggly Wiggly grocery store, hotels. And so as he began to explain and tell me a little bit about who his dad was, his dad had, married his stepmom, but before that, he was married to his mother that had 6 children, 6 boys, and that his mom died of cancer, and his dad would have done anything in the world to save his first wife. Then he married his second wife that had 5 boys, which gave them a total of 11 boys. And in that union, they had 2 more boys, which would be a total of 13 boys. So he began to tell me the things that, his dad would, just be very visible in the community. And, he was a pastor there, him and his mom, they were very instrumental in bringing about a lot of, friends and family and people together to help and support their ministry. So as the story went on, I began to take interest in why would this man be accused of murdering his stepson and be arrested on the day that the hospital announced his son dead and did not even have a death determination of what the cause of death was. So at that point, I began to take it personal.
We were all shocked when within an hour the jury, it was guilty, all 12 jurors. In my mind, seeing one of the past judges walk in that courtroom during jury deliberations where we're not allowed to go and he's a door away from those jurors, I can't say something happens, but I don't think that that's okay. I don't think it's okay that the judge in the trial that gave him a non-unanimous jury verdict came and sat in the courtroom every day. I don't think it's okay that they sat and stared at the jurors and the witnesses on the stand. And I don't think it's okay that the state's witness attacked one of our key witnesses, Reverend Victor's biological son. Even though for days I asked for security when he came, and that was not, it got to a point where on the second to last day, they assigned all of Reverend Victor's criminal defense team and children their own sheriff's officer to follow them around all day, even if we walked outside of that courthouse just to take a break.
One of the things, Christina, while you're talking about, the judge had retired. I think the judge had been retired for several years now. Yeah. And also the prosecutor that had retired sat in the courtroom. And one of the judges that had been recused after the case also showed up in the courtroom.
Yeah.
So, and I wanted you to
which is the same judge that went in during jury deliberations.
That's correct. This was horrific to see that the state had how many lawyers that they had there. It looked
AG's like office had 4 of their main attorneys, starting at the level right below Jeff Landry. the Attorney General. So, you know, Mr. Grant Willis was there, of course, and Attorney General Russell was the main prosecutor. But, you know, I found out at one point, you know, one of the men who took the stand or took the mic at the table during jury selection and started arguing the case. I found out yesterday he's not even an attorney. He is an investigator for the AG's office, and he was never supposed to be able to stand up and argue with Clay and object on the case like he did. And wow. I found that out yesterday. So, yeah.
You know, there was so many, you know, I remember we had appeared for a motion hearing on behalf of Reverend Victor in that courtroom. And we were told that if you were there to in support of Reverend Victor, you had to sit on the back row. Mm-hmm. To me, that was worse than, you know, going all the way back to, you know, what, when Rosa Parks was told that she had to sit on the back of the bus. Mm-hmm. You know, there was some things that was happening in that courtroom, and I know that you have video of it. When I walked in through the metal detectors, I was told that I had to take off of my jacket, a part of my personal clothing, before I can walk through the metal detector.
Yep. You know, our the first few days, we didn't feel any different, and we felt that they were choosing to respect our boundaries and understand that, you know, every day that I was walking in, I had my key tag on, so they knew who I was. I had my bag of exhibits all printed out. I mean, pictures of a deceased body that would be going up on the screen for the jurors. Every single transcript that we were going to bring up in question, they were digging through my bags after the fourth day. They started digging through my bags after I watched a white police officer run out of the courtroom across from us and chase down a young African-American male, saying that he opened the door too rough. And I had to stop him in the middle of getting rough with that young African-American male. And ever since then, on that, I think it was the third or fourth day, it was not. We were searched every day. Even though they were not allowed to go through what we had, they did anyway. I remember the day that you were going into security, and it was maybe the last day of trial. They've never searched you the way that they did, but they made you lift up your shirt. And when you refused to lift up your shirt and turn around, and I videoed the entire situation, they made you leave because you would not lift not only your jacket, but your shirt. And he tried to lift your jacket for you. And, you know, all of these sheriff deputies started walking out the door, seeing what's going on, and never acknowledged it once. When I tried to speak to them, it's on video. They all ignored me. Anytime I tried to file a complaint about the issues that we were having, I was not allowed to file a complaint with the sheriff's office, which I recorded. I made sure that I even recorded the witnesses for the state outside talking to each other right after one went, talking to the one that's about to get on the stand. I mean, it's, yeah, I do. What happened to you was, it was beyond discrimination.
You know, one of the things, it was totally impossible for anyone and it's such as Reverend Victor to get a fair trial in that courthouse. That courthouse is the most dilapidated, unprofessional, I mean, just downright, the worst place. Because when I looked at the fact that the jurors, we was told to sit in our cars until the jurors came in. They had to come through the same entrance that everybody else was coming through. They didn't even have a separate door. Then they had to sit out in the hallway along with everyone else out there in the hallway. They didn't have nowhere to sequester the witnesses or the jurors
which is the same place they had me put my printer. You know, they wouldn't give us a room for our criminal defense team to have privacy with our client, and all of our equipment. I had to have a printer in the hallway where all of the jurors sat.
And that's how one of our eyewitnesses got attacked in the hallway. And when you know, the video showed that he was attacked in the hallway and also detained for over an hour after he had been attacked. Then we had to call him to the witness stand with blood on his shirt and blood running down the back of his neck. So the judge would not allow that to be mentioned because the witness that attacked our witness was going to be called back to the stand, had been arrested. None of that was allowed to. None of that was allowed to be mentioned.
You know, not only that, we were not allowed to mention the first case.
And our attorney said that he was declaring a mistrial because he could not bear to question his witness after he had been attacked in such a horrific way. These type of things I have never, ever experienced before in a courtroom. When you have the judge talking to the expert witnesses, you have the prosecutor talking to the jurors. There was one incident, Christina, you remember when we noticed that one of the jurors spoke to the victim's dad. And also, when he spoke to the victim's dad, like a high five or something like it's going to be all right or something like that, we, you know, explain what happened with that situation.
The juror was called in during the selection process to, it was a potential juror, to have us ask some questions, kind of feel the juror out. And upon leaving, and we didn't dismiss him. He was actually, you know, we were going to call him back for questions. We were interested in this juror. But upon leaving the courtroom, he was speaking to the biological father of the deceased child. It was almost like he tapped his shoulder and said, you know, it's going to be okay, type of conversation, quick words. We all caught it. And it was brought up and the judge dismissed it. We did not have that juror. But I would also go back to, you know, we weren't allowed to mention the first case. We were not allowed to mention the first case, but the state was allowed to bring in evidence from the first case. And the first case, it was dismissed because they said there was no homicide. You know, the last question that we asked the expert doctor, mind you, every state's witness pretty much impeached themselves. I mean, they all got caught in lies, and the jury saw that. So that's why, one, it was so shocking. The jury did not, you know, the entire closing arguments in the trial was the state apologizing for his non-credible witnesses and making excuses for them, saying it's been 14 years. It hasn't been 14 years. Because 2014, the last trial, and I'm sure they read all of their transcripts, some of the witnesses were reading stories of they were going based off of the wrong transcript. I'll just say that.
You know, when you see these type of things, the corruption that was unfolding in this case and why they were so determined to find an innocent man guilty of a crime that he did not commit. Everything that could have possibly been proven in this case, that Reverend Victor did not do what they said he did. the burden of prosecution, the burden to prove, the prosecution could not prove anything that they said.
Their expert doctor, you know, the last question that Claiborne Hill, the criminal defense attorney, mentioned asked him was, Dr. Benton, is it normal to do an autopsy from a photograph? Or the autopsy and the death certificate that came out the second time, this is the second autopsy report, not the first from the first case, you know, it was on a day where the body was in the morgue and had just come out of the cooler. And anything that they got that day would have been post-mortem and was not in the hospital records. You know, in one of the testimonies, it was the child was kicked in the face and blunt force trauma to the head is what someone testified to on the stand. Repeat beating for 48 hours. The child did not have a single broken bone, a single broken blood vessel, no blood on his body when he entered that hospital.
Yes, it is great to join you all. Dr. Z is what they call me affectionately, Dr. ZENA CRENSHAW-LOGAL, and I'm Assistant Chief of Operations for Louisiana United International. And you can see from the screen I'm appearing as a founding co-principal of Brown Vindicators, which is a human rights defender, specialized life crisis manager, and expert witnesses. And we've teamed up with Louisiana United International to provide Reverend Victor crisis management. And I'm working with these great women. I want to ask you all a question. You talked about this fight, this altercation between apparently Pastor Victor's stepsons against his biological sons. So, you know, the implications of that, it seems to be multiple implications, and people have somewhat presumed that people would draw one conclusion from that. So what is this? Is this about the stepsons being angry at the biological sons for supposedly being part of this brutal beating of their now
absolutely not
deceased brothers? Or what was that about? Would you suggest to the listeners? Because the scenario fits the theory that the biological brothers would be angry at the Victor sons for taking part in killing the stepson. And then there could also naturally be just hostility on the part of Victor's sons, that the stepsons have concocted this story against their father, knowing that he is innocent. So how does, you know, help people understand what conclusion we should be drawing from this hostility? And I think, Ms. Belinda, at one point,
I think that
you were talking about that the stepsons were they took this strategy of implicating Reverend Victor because they thought that somehow they would save their mother.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what happened?
I think that, right. I think that it was the attack was all about to keep the truth from coming out. You know, because of the fact that the mom had already taken the stand as one of the defense eyewitnesses, that, you know, she you know, basically told the court, the jury, that her sons were just some bad kids. They were constantly fighting each other, you know, her kids, not Pastor Victor's sons, not his sons by his biological wife. She told the court that her sons that had 3 different fathers, deadbeat dads, that were drug addicts, drug dealers, and that her sons were bad, and that they fought each other all the time. And on that night before, she had broke them up from fighting each other, you know, fighting ML, throwing him around, you know, choking him, And she got on the witness stand and said that that was a constant thing with them, that they were just rebellion and disobedient. They had problems all throughout school, being defiant of authority, being suspended from school. They got kicked out the church, so the pastor told them don't come back, because they couldn't behave themselves. So I think that the attack on Pastor Victor's biological son was to keep the truth from coming out, because he was going to get on the witness stand and speak the truth about how bad those children, the stepkids really were in the home.
Well, yeah, I'm going to thank Ms. Christina for mentioning our action that we took just minutes before this so-called second jury verdict. And there's so much process associated with this case. Hopefully our listeners understand that the tragic death was on April 1st, 2008, and we are in 2022 talking about this family tragedy that turned into a nightmare. The title of a press release that appears online nearly 300 times, it really says it all. And the title is that the scheduled trial of Louisiana minister tainted by state's racist past and alleged court corruption. And of course, that minister is Reverend Victor, and the state is the state of Louisiana. So literally, this racist past relates to Louisiana's documented motive for allowing people to be convicted for serious crimes by a less than unanimous jury verdict. So we've heard you all talk about, the fact that initially the case was thrown out by a judge on the grounds that there was no homicide. And then in 2014, supposedly Reverend Victor was convicted by a less than unanimous jury verdict for ML's death, second degree murder. And then we had this thing that happened in 2022 where supposedly a second jury, as some reporters are calling it, reached a conclusion unanimously that Reverend Victor was in fact guilty of that crime. So, this all started, the history is you got this racist past, you've got the state of Louisiana allowing people to be convicted by a less than unanimous jury verdict, and that lowers the threshold for convictions. And people of color are among Louisiana's incarcerated populations at much higher rates than they are in the general population. So at times, the state of Louisiana was, United States is already leading the world insofar as the number of people who are incarcerated per capita. And at times, the state of Louisiana's rate of incarceration exceeded our national rate of incarceration. So Louisiana is like, it has no shortage of incarcerated people. And when you allow people to be convicted by less than 12 jurors, then you're making it easier to accomplish these convictions as if somehow there's a government interest in maximizing the number of convictions. And then you have the confirmed history and literally Louisiana government records, is my understanding, where allowing a less than unanimous jury verdict was intended to dilute the influence of Black jurors, just diminish their influence on any group of 12 people gathering. If it took less than all 12 to convict, then the likelihood that any Black jurors that made it to the jury would not be able to dissuade everyone from a conviction. So, this is a clearly institutionalized racism that's associated with just how the state of Louisiana went about, gaining these convictions. So that's why Ms. Belinda and I joined Reverend Victor in challenging his second trial as a violation of America's double jeopardy clause. And we anticipate that it's going to be at least 3 and perhaps even 4 challenges of Louisiana's authority to try Reverend Victor anytime after his purported conviction in 2014, which, as we all know, was vacated in response to the 2020 landmark U.S. Supreme Court case of Ramos versus Louisiana, where the U.S. Supreme Court took the task the state of Louisiana for this decade-long practice of allowing less than 12 people to come to a conviction. And the courts is saying that a jury verdict of supposedly rendered by less than 12 jurors is essentially no verdict at all. But what some people have suggested is that Reverend Victor needs to have a trial to prove his innocence. But what they're missing is that double jeopardy protects people from government tactics that increase the prospect of conviction, regardless of a defendant's guilt or innocence. So, you got the 10-2, you got the, less than unanimous jury verdict. That's about making it easier to get convictions. That's what it's all about. And in our collateral challenge of Reverend Victor's trial and saying that the court did not have jurisdiction to conduct a second trial, and to say that this, the second trial, full trial that did in fact take place just at this point a couple of weeks or so ago, in starting on July 11th, they went to pick a jury, and challenging all of that. Pastor Victor, Ms. Belinda, and I, we have not sought to avoid an obvious and good faith quest to find the truth. That is not our intention, to avoid the truth or avoid an attempt to find the truth. We have objective evidence that Reverend Victor's prosecution has been anything but a quest to find the truth from its very inception, from as Ms. Christina talked about, 20 or so minutes from the death of his stepson. This has not been about finding the truth. What it has been about is government oppression, institutionalized racism, illegal tactics, including collusion between the prosecutors and private parties, and even some of the presiding judges. And that's what we're seeking to stop. And hopefully that becomes clear as we continue to go about having the discussion of the circumstances of Reverend Victor's so-called second trial and a so-called jury verdict.
When it comes to, Reverend Victor being a Black man in this community that was a very prominent businessman, and his number one competitor was a white man that was the husband. Listen, people, the husband of the judge that gave him life in prison. It really makes you think when you canvass the community and you talk to the people. And I do remember that one of the hotels that we were staying at, Christina, if you want to elaborate on, what that young man told you, that young Black man that was sitting behind that counter that night, it was very disturbing to hear him say those words.
It was the same hotel that I got kicked out of. And he actually, the day after having a conversation with me at night, which was the same place that the state's witnesses started staying the day that I was kicked out, he was actually pulled over, and they tried to search his car, and the dog did not hint the smell of marijuana, but she tried to say that there was marijuana in the car, and the other officer that came to the scene asked her to let it go and let him go. But I was, out writing some notes on my phone and just prepping my mind for trial to start the next day on Monday, July 11th. So this was Sunday night before trial, and he saw me pacing outside, right outside the hotel doors. And when I came in, he asked me, what was I doing? I looked like I was so busy in thought. And I said, I want to ask you a question. What do you think about your parish? And his response, and only response about what he thought about his parish, was that they only see him as the descendant of a slave. And we're talking about maybe 22 or 23 years old.
So when it comes to that, a Black man on trial in a parish like that, is it anywhere possible, Dr. ZENA, that, there would be a pursuit for justice, a pursuit for the truth, of what really happened? Or is he just being seen as a slave that need to be put in his place? Because the only reason why I believe that Reverend Victor and his wife is in prison right now is because they were Black and they were prominent business people that was going to bring about some economic development to help other Black people to become business owners in that community.
Well, Ms. Belinda, I'm inclined to answer that question in a rather lawyerly way. And the objective evidence definitely makes race seeming to be a pivotal factor in the decision to prosecute Reverend Victor. And the way he was treated has parallels to historical treatment of African Americans in this country. So while we have not we're not, looking into the hearts and minds of the individuals involved and knowing exactly what their personal motivations are, we are going to be investigating those sort of considerations. But their conduct certainly, in objective terms, lines up with a reasonable allegation that race is a factor. That race motivates what has happened.
Right, and then I want to say the malicious, vindictive prosecution, where everything was just so blatant, how we were being treated in support of him, in that courtroom, so when we say that, you are being race-based prosecution or maliciously prosecuted because you're a Black man, or vindictively prosecuted because of your race, it was real. I mean, it breathed in that courtroom. It reeked in there, throughout the whole process. A Black man would not have stood a chance.
Yes, and that the law in this country is that, if there's evidence of a crime, the fact that a prosecutor may have a bad faith motive, they never did like you, you're somebody, I used the example that you dated the prosecutor's high school sweetheart, he never did like you. Well, in this country, it makes sense if there's evidence that you're guilty of a crime, the fact that the prosecutor doesn't like you is irrelevant. But when the evidence is that these unconstitutional grounds for discriminating against people, their race, their religion, their social economic status, then that's when it becomes a violation of people's human rights to have criminal prosecution, the power of the state or federal government turned against them. And then you add on top of that the taxes that are used, and we have very compelling evidence, and you've talked about it, the strategies that were used to create an advantage for the state of Louisiana, and put Reverend Victor in a position where he was unlikely to be able to prove his innocence. So again, this is not about an attempt to avoid bringing out the truth. This is about trying to avoid the power of the government being used to make sure anything but that happens. And you use the key terminology: vindictive prosecution, fueled by racial animus, conducting illegal means. I would like to hear Ms. Christina talk in terms of how this pattern repeats itself among other people who are involved in the criminal justice system in this country, perhaps not necessarily race discrimination, but other forms of the government using unconstitutional discrimination as to who they go after, and then using these questionable tactics, arguably illegal tactics, in order to get a conviction. How much of that do you know about through your work? Both of you, I asked both of you, but I know Ms. Christina talked about that.
I mean, in some parishes in Louisiana, you can get arrested just for retaliation for filing a bar complaint against an attorney. And the whole parish and DA's office and police officers are going to stand behind that one attorney. Because if not, they would all lose their jobs and their licenses for never mandating reporting as a mandated reporter that attorney being high in court, or the allegations that that's in the bar complaint. And I know that from a personal level.
So you're talking about the unconstitutional discrimination. They're essentially going after whistleblowers, government corruption whistleblowers.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Some people incarcerated, they have horrible things happening to them. But the person that they have to report it to is the person doing it to them. And so it keeps happening. With regard to what you guys filed, and I want to put this out there real quick for, with Reverend Victor in the 19th JDC, that is not just going to help Reverend Victor. There is over 1,000 people currently incarcerated in the state of Louisiana that have no conviction and have no sentence because the Supreme Court ruled it is unconstitutional to have a non-unanimous jury. There are so many other things that this petition helps as well, though. The petition, if the state challenges back, or if they, let's say, accept the fight and argue what has been put for them to argue, they have to do their work. This is not some simple arguments being put in front of them. And these arguments will impact the legal system in Louisiana, but nationally, when it comes to the weaponization of our system against men and women. One thing that shocked me is the number 6 leading cause of death right now, ages 18 to 29, for African-American men is police brutality. That is a new report that came out. And just seeing that a lot of them are covered up because we don't hear about them. There's always the amount or the level of people's rights that are a lot of police officers are violating your constitutional rights because they don't know and they've never been taught what they're violating. They have no idea. I spoke to a police officer about it in St. John the Baptist for the 6th and 14th Amendment, the 4th Amendment, 5th Amendment, the 1st Amendment. He didn't realize some of the things he's doing is actually violating people's constitutional rights. I think that, in not only the state of Louisiana, but in the whole nation, it needs to be completely investigated on the process of starting from the arrest to that arrest investigation. They are put in jail. It's investigated. It goes to the DA's office. Who's screening those cases? Who's screening those cases to even be billed and get a docket number? And it's all backed by the corruption. Mm-hmm. And the deep-rooted corruption.
Yeah, it really saddens me when you think about the fact that a district attorney would rather preserve their conviction rate by any means so that they either can, I guess, make sure that they be reelected, then all the little tricks and games that politicians play with each other, and they're more concerned about preserving their conviction rates than innocent people going to prison.
When they will drop a robbery charge to disturbing the peace, if you plead guilty as charged to possession of crack cocaine less than a gram that hasn't even been proven that's been on his person, and you won't have any time to serve, just plead guilty as charged. That is railroaded into a plea deal, and they've already sat in jail for a year and they're exhausted, and they've been in this mental psychological warfare like a hamster wheel dealing with the system, and they want to get out, and that's their easy way out. And yesterday I learned of someone who on his arraignment date and on parole, who only has a drug addiction, pled guilty to possession of heroin and is backing up parole time now and has another 2 years. And on arraignment date.
I remember, Reverend Victor's telling me that he had paid an attorney, I think it was like $120,000 to one of the attorneys that came on his case. Could have been more or less. But the attorney was threatening and badgering and forcing him to plead guilty to something he did not do. And one of the attorneys told him, you're gonna, they're gonna get you. You might as well take a plea. Do you want to spend the rest of your life in Angola? You need to plead to this. So, when you see those type of things happening, and a lot of people plead because they don't have the money. They can't afford.
Plea good today is a plea good the last day of trial.
And so, but it's the saddest thing to me is when an attorney would take your money, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and then you wind up pleading to something that you didn't do. A plea is free.
I personally witnessed an attorney defraud many people, which is why I was retaliated against and still am being retaliated against. But I watched 147 only African-American men, not white women, not white men, not Asian, not Hispanic, only African-American men who majority were innocent, be pushed into a plea deal and habitually build on the deal they took last year in 2021 alone, 2021. And it was between one person in one parish, one person in another parish, and all 145 of them in one specific parish.
What if you was told to take a plea after you paid the attorney, $25,000?
You're going to be. In many parishes here, you're not going to pay an attorney. You can tell your attorney the day you hire him or her, I want a pit bull attorney. I want to go to trial. There's no other option. But that is not going to happen. They're going to try to push you in that plea.